Hello and welcome to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Isabel. I'm very excited to be joining you here in the studio today with my friends Sonia and Karina, who are going to be controlling all of the activities that are happening behind me on screen here. I'd like us to warm up our brains today very quickly because we have a lot I want to get through. And I want us to just take a moment to make some observations, aka fancy science word for things that we notice, right? So any shapes, colors, any animals that you might recognize. Today's topic is going to be who lives in a shell. And I don't know if anybody's noticed any animals that live in a shell so far, but I do notice some sharks and some rays. If you at any point have any questions or would like to text in your observations, my friend Sonia is going to put up a number on the screen that will allow you to send us if you're watching live at 9 or at 10 a.m. You can text 562-286-1838. And if you're watching after the fact, you can email any of your questions at live@lbaop.org. I think our camera is actually getting some nudges from one of our animals that lives in a shell, and that is our olive ridley sea turtle named Theo. So we're going to be talking a bit about some different animals first, and we'll get to our friend Theo. There he is, showing off that shell. And so what these shells do for an animal, if you want to think for a moment, why would an animal want to have a shell? If we think about maybe defense, right? If you were a predator, maybe like one of the sharks that we have in the pool here, it'd be really hard for them to eat Mr. Theo there because of that hard shell. And of course, because these sharks also don't eat large animals either. That's why they are able to peacefully coexist in this exhibit. But I'm glad we got a little cameo from our boy Theo over here. But let's go ahead and switch over to our dot cam so we can start answering the main question here, which is who lives in a shell? And so I'd like us to think about for a moment, if we can think of any animals off of the top of our heads about that live in a shell. And once again, feel free to text those in. And if you want to highlight or talk about a very particular animal, maybe your favorite animal that lives in a shell, go ahead and let us know, and we can spend a bit more time talking about that animal. So, in order to answer this question, who lives in a shell, we've got to talk about exactly our different kinds of animals. In science, we like to group animals together based off of their characteristics. And our first group of animals that we're going to be talking about are our invertebrates. And that is how you spell it there, invertebrate. Now, if you're an invertebrate, that means that you don't have any bones in your body. Are we invertebrates? Hopefully not. If you reach behind you, you might be able to feel your own backbone. Having a backbone means that you are not an invertebrate. However, invertebrates make up about 90% of all described animal species. So, invertebrates are very, very diverse, many of which have shells. Not all, but quite a lot of them. And so, if anybody's thought of any maybe shelled animals that don't have any bones, right? So that doesn't include our sea turtle that we started off with because he does have bones. But one kind of group of invertebrates that we tend to think of with shells are called mollusks. And this is how you would spell it if you're talking about the kind of taxonomy of animals. And so mollusks are animals that are characterized by having a muscular foot and most of the time having a hard shell. So, are there any animals that we can think of that have a soft body with a muscular foot and a hard shell? In fact, I think my friend Sonia might be able to pull up a picture of one of them that we have here at our aquarium, one of my favorite kinds of mollusks, which is our abalone sea snail. Now, you might be able to see here the hard shell on top. It's a little bit harder to see that soft body, that muscular foot, but you can see it on this one down here. It's very hidden by that shell, but this is what allows them to move around and where all of their internal organs are. So they also have these kind of sensory organs, these little feelers all around. So we have lots of different abalone here. So not only do these shells help them with defense, but it also helps them with camouflage. I want to see if we can count how many abalones we have in this photo. I see, of course, this one right front and center, 2 over here, 3, 4 down here, even one down all the way in the corner here, 5, and I think that's another one, 6. And these are some of our white abalone that we help breed here at the aquarium because, believe it or not, some of our abalone are endangered, meaning there's not a lot of them left. So those shells are very, very important to them. And if we go back to our dot cam, I actually have one of our abalone shells here with us today. And you can see just how beautiful it is on the inside. It's very shimmery, very pretty. And this might be part of the reason why they are endangered is because people like to collect these shells, right? They also happen to be very tasty. And so overfishing is another reason why they are endangered. But luckily they are now protected and no longer able to be fished. So you can see on top, we might notice that it looks very rocky. That helps with that camouflage. You don't want to have that super shimmery, gorgeous lining on the outside because that would make you stand out, especially if there's some light. We also have some holes in the side here as well, I'm noticing. So you might be wondering, why is that so pretty and shimmery on the inside? Because that's where their body is. And so it keeps that part of the shell nice and pretty. So we can go back to our question of who lives in a shell. And one of the answers to that for our mollusks could be our abalone. And they are actually a member of a special group of mollusks which are called gastropods, right? Essentially meaning stomach foot, because once again, their foot is right where their stomach or their organs are. Excellent. There's also some other animals in this family that are defined by having 2 shells. In fact, I once again have some of those shells with me today. And if you know what these shells might be from, what kind of animals, feel free to text us. So 3 different examples of some different animals that belong to the category that I'm thinking of, which are our bivalves, right? And so this is only half of the picture. This is one of our clam shells, and clams actually would have 2 of these shells together with their body in the middle. So this is for a clam, this one is for a different kind of clam, and this one is for a scallop, right? So once again, all different kinds of shapes and colors, but the same purpose, which is going to be that defense and a lot of times camouflage. So that's the next animal that we have that lives in a shell are going to be bivalves, such as clams. Bivalve, the prefix bi, meaning bicycle, right? So we have bivalve 2 shells. Okay, so that might be a lot to digest, but this is how one of the ways that we categorize our animals, especially our invertebrates. When there's so many of them, it helps us make a little bit more sense of where each of them come from. We have another mollusk, one more mollusk, that is actually a member of a different kind of group, which are called the cephalopods. Let's see if my friend Sonia has a picture of one. Ooh, yes. Do we see a shell on this animal? In fact, a very, very pretty shell all around the outside with that pattern, that kind of tiger stripe. Some of you guys might recognize this animal. It's related to a squid or an octopus, and they are called the the nautilus, right? And so the nautilus has the hard shell on the outside of their body, and then their tentacles here. And this funny looking thing right here is actually their eyeball. So you can see that the shell is protecting most of their most important parts of their body, such as those insides. And the cephalopods include other animals like octopus and squid, but if you've ever seen an octopus, do they have a shell? I don't think so. So once again, I said not all of them have hard shells, but because some of them might have lost them along the way in evolution, but some of them, like our nautilus, still have their shells. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to our little tree for our answer of who lives in a shell, which is the nautilus. All right. So far, we've tackled all of our mollusks. There might be some others that you can think of as well, right? We do have other kinds of snails, such as cowries, as well as whelks. That would be in that gastropod family. And their shells are very, very pretty as well. So you can find all different kinds of shapes, colors, patterns on our shells. The possibilities truly are endless. So quite the diversity in shells, especially among those gastropods. There are over 60,000 species of slugs and snails. Awesome. Okay. So we've tackled one family of invertebrates so far. I wonder if we have another one, which is going to be a member called the arthropods. Now, we might be noticing a pattern. I've seen this suffix pod in a lot of our words, and pod means foot, right? If you've ever used a tripod for your camera, a tripod has 3 feet that holds it up, right? So we've got our gastropod, stomach foot. Cephalopod actually means head foot, believe it or not, because if you were built like a nautilus or an octopus, your head and your body would actually be swapped, and your legs would be coming out of your head. And believe it or not, all of their internal organs sit above their head, and all of their feet come out of their head. So they're very different bodies than we have, and that just kind of shows us exactly what kind of diversity we have in our invertebrates. So arthropods, however, are going to be a little bit different than our mollusks. Lots of them do have exoskeletons. Including shells. And then arthropod itself actually means jointed foot. Are there any animals that we can think of that look like their feet are jointed, right? That they have jointed legs, that, because we have joints on our legs, right? But if you think back to like our abalone, clam, nautilus, first of all, they don't even have legs. So, and their feet, right, that they use to move around is not looking very jointed, right? They don't have that same kind of structure. And so I wonder if we have a picture of one of our arthropods. Oh, perfect. Like our crustaceans, right? Crustaceans are one of our categories of arthropods. In this case, we have one of our king crabs. And so you can see this shell is very equipped for defense. It's got spikes all over it. Do we notice anything else on our crab? Any other maybe methods of defense? Maybe we said those big claws that they have. That is for sure one of the ways in which a crab might protect itself from predators. It's also how they gather their food. And then we also have those jointed feet, right? You can see where they have those joints where they're able to bend those legs, which allows for very skilled movement, right? Oh, here's a close-up of our one of our spider crabs' faces, right? So they've also got some pretty cool eyes. In fact, they have their mouth is going to be behind these two little extra claws that they have. And so our crustaceans, they're going to have those very specialized jointed legs, right? And so I also have one of these crab molts here with me in the studio. They're very, very delicate. Crabs are going to molt in order to grow larger. So you can find these a lot of times after they've shed them. If you've ever been walking along the beach, you might have noticed maybe some crab or lobster shells. That doesn't always mean that the animal passed away. It might just mean that it got bigger and outgrew its exoskeleton home, right? And so it's very, very pointy. It's definitely going to be deterring any sort of predators from eating it. And we can get a better view of it under the dock cam because it was cutting out a little bit there. But you can see, if we switch to our dock cam, how those spines might look closer up. Awesome. So you can see those different spines that we have on our spider or king crab's shells, right? So we can add our crustaceans to our list of arthropods, crustaceans, including our king crab. And then any other crustacean. I kind of mentioned one of them already that you might find washed up along the ocean floor, and that is our lobsters, right? So once again, spines all across the exoskeleton, as well as we have the legs intact for this one, so you can see those jointed feet that they use to move around. And then if we flip it over, you can also see where their mouth is protected by those extra set of what we call mandibles. So we've got king crabs. We also have lobsters, or just crabs in general. Lobsters. And believe it or not, another animal that I would not expect to be a crustacean belongs in this category as well, which I have here with us what their shell looks like. Do we recognize this animal? What this might be from? If you said barnacle, you'll be correct. Now, you wouldn't think of barnacles as looking much like a crab or a lobster, but they're actually related to one another. They are one of these arthropods. So this is their hard shell, and then their bodies are on the inside, right? Now, once again, we have an exception to the rule of have exactly jointed feet. Once our barnacles attach to something, they stay there for their entire lives. But when they are babies, when they are larvae, if you look really, really close up with a microscope, they have some of those structures, just like our crabs and other crustaceans do. Okay, so far, just to recap, we have crustaceans as part of being our arthropods, categorized by their exoskeleton and jointed foot. Now, we don't have any other, any insects necessarily that are very successful in the ocean, but that would be another member of this family of arthropods. And we have lots and lots of insects. They are one of the most diverse categories of animals that we have that have really spread all over our planet. But I don't have any of those with me today, so we won't be talking too much about them. But you can consider any sort of insect as part of that arthropod group. There's one, however, that is a little bit different that you wouldn't expect. Now, this animal, its name is a bit misleading, and I'm going to show you. I have one of their shells with me today. If you recognize this animal, you can text it to us once again at that number, 562-286-1838. This is, my friends, a horseshoe crab. Now, why did I put horseshoe crab in with the rest of the crustaceans? Because they are not crabs at all, believe it or not. we have another category of arthropods that they belong to. So I'm going to bring this back up, and I'm going to give them their own little tree here, which are called Chelicerata. Now, this is a really big word, and I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Chelicerata. But this is going to include, believe it or not, our horseshoe crab, as well as arachnids such as spiders, not spider crabs, spiders. Horseshoe crabs are more related to spiders than they are spider crabs, believe it or not. So, a horseshoe crab is going to be a member of that family. Oh, let me scoot that up so you can see it a bit better. Instead of our crustaceans. But just like our crustaceans, they do have that spiny exoskeleton, that shell. Once again, equipped with some pretty serious spines that they have. And if you flip them over, you can see once again some jointed feet. And just like our crabs, they will molt them in order to grow larger. So, horseshoe crabs have a very specialized shell that allows them to defend themselves as well. So, we have lots of different invertebrates, and this is really just scratching the surface. There are more beyond these ones as well. But we have kind of exhausted most of our invertebrates. Let's see, do we have any other animals? We talked about one earlier that have a shell that might not be an invertebrate. If you're an invertebrate, meaning no spine, what would you call an animal that does have a spine? What do we think? They are called vertebrates. And that is the category that you and I fall into, is our vertebrates. And so, if we can show off one of my favorite ocean animals, which of course are our sea turtles. Now, this is a different species than the original one that we saw in our shark lagoon, but I have one of those shells in the studio with me today. This is a hawksbill sea turtle, and they are fairly large, right? It's about the whole size of my torso, and they can get even larger than this. And so you can see that this shell is full of these little plates called scutes. And our sea turtle is also using these for their protection, right? So they can use those in order to stay safe. Now, sea turtles are a little bit different than our turtles on land. They can't actually retract into those shells, right? They are still out in the open when it comes to their flippers, their head, and their tail, but most of their important body parts are inside of that shell. So, if we look on the inside of this shell, you can actually see that backbone, that spine. So this shows us that we actually are looking at a vertebrate instead of an invertebrate. And so you can see all along here, right, is where their spine is actually fused to their shell. So believe it or not, a sea turtle is never going to molt or shed their shell. It is fused to them and continues to grow with them, right? So that's something that's a little bit different than our invertebrates. Because once again, are sea turtles related to our snails or our crabs? Not very closely, right? Maybe very, very, very distantly, but ultimately they're not very closely related to each other. And so this is an example of what we actually call convergent evolution, which is really fascinating, where two unrelated animals develop the same trait, the same adaptation, in this case being a shell. And that kind of shows you how good of a defense a shell can be. And so our sea turtle is a member of our vertebrates. In fact, they are reptiles. So we can see it back on our dock cam. We have some reptiles, of course, not all reptiles, that have shells. And so this is going to include turtles and tortoises. So we've got turtles and tortoises are some of our reptiles that have shells. And so reptiles are a little bit different than you or I. We are considered mammals, right? And reptiles are going to be cold-blooded, right? So a little bit different than our bodies that can produce our own heat. If you feel your forehead right now, you might notice it feels a little bit warm to the touch. That's because we're always producing our own body heat, and why you don't need a heat lamp in your bedroom, right? Whereas our turtles and tortoises, especially if you have them maybe as pets, you would require some extra special care like those heat lamps. And this is something that their bodies require in order to maintain their temperature. So we've got some reptiles like our turtles and tortoises, but not all reptiles, right? So others like our lizards, iguanas, they are not going to have those shells. They might have some spines or scales to protect them in other ways, but those shells are going to be unique to our turtles and tortoises. So an example of very two unrelated categories of animals that have this same trait, right? And so when something is successful for an animal, an adaptation as we call them, you can find them in many different forms, right? They've all kind of specialized and modified how that shell works best for them. In the case of our sea turtle, right, it's fused to their spine, so they'll always have it with them. It grows along with them and is formed out of all of these different plates called scutes. But if you are a, let's say, nautilus, your shell is instead going to be kind of this really interesting spiral shape and have this very unique kind of tiger stripe pattern. And there's our nautilus once again. So all of their important body parts, all of their internal organs are going to be inside that shell with just their little tentacles hanging out so that they can grab onto their food and use them to move around as well. So our nautilus, they have their own special shell. But if you were, say, a abalone, your shell is going to look a bit different, right? Where instead, we have our, they have their kind of holes on the top that allow them to have their feelers. They have the very pretty inside that allows them to blend into their rock and allows them to move around on the bottom. So, very different kinds of animals with very different kinds of shells, but ultimately the same adaptation for defense. And then I also have our lobster and our crabs as well, some of our arthropods that have their exoskeletons that you can find all over our oceans, believe it or not. They are a very diverse class of animals. So lots of different, like our spider crab here. So we've got some pointy arms, some pointy legs, as well as you might even notice some crabs have other kinds of animals that live on the backs of those shells. Maybe like some anemones or sponges. That's what our decorator crab uses in order to camouflage. But it actually also benefits those animals that are living on their backs, like those sponges and anemones. They're catching a free ride to new access to new sources of food, right? So it provides them access to more kinds of more places that they can gather their food. So thank you guys for learning so much about our different shells. If you have any questions after the fact, please email us live@lbaop.org. And I'm going to provide a challenge for you. If you can think of, there's one other animal that I didn't talk about because it lives on land, that is a vertebrate, that is a mammal, that has a shell. For a hint, when it's scared, it's able to curl up into a ball and use that shell to protect itself. It'll roll up into a little ball and so that animals can't get to it. So that's your hint at what animal I'm thinking of. If you know what animal I'm thinking of, go ahead and email live@lbaop.org and see if you can figure it out. Thank you guys so much for joining us here in the studio, and we'll see you for our next week's program. Thank you.